Brian, good morning. Thank you. And again, thanks to Red Hat for sponsoring us this morning. Welcome, everybody. I'm going to give you a 5-minute intro into Red 8 and what we do. So Red 8's been around for about 15 years, typical in the data center space. We've delivered a lot of hardware solutions for years. And about 3+ years ago, we started getting it more into the practices solutions for the 5 you list up there. So we've got a security practice, DevOps, cloud automation, advanced analytics. Today, Steve and Tobias will be focused in on the DevOps cloud automation one, some Ansible expertise as what we've done. We, as the cloud and automation group, we do a lot with OpenShift. We do a lot with Ansible, both excellent Red Hat products. We also have some amazing GitOps and CI/CD solutions we built, as well as getting heavily into Kubernetes. So all of those are very exciting spaces that we're getting in. Today, again, we're focused in on the Ansible solutions that Stephen will demonstrate, as well as we've applied both of these to on-prem and both private and hybrid cloud solutions. So I will leave it at that and let Stephen take over. Thank you, Stephen, for being here and giving this demo today, and everybody enjoy your demo.
Cool. So, hey, everybody. I'm Stephen Tobias. I'm the cloud architect here at Red 8. I do a lot of work just kind of working with infrastructure as code in general. We'll talk about what that is and how it relates to Ansible. But today we're going to talk about what is Ansible. You know, if we take a step back, what is it anyway, right? What can we do with it? And why would we pick it over some other things out there? And then after kind of the intro stuff, we're going to jump into some demos. Everybody loves a good tech demo. So we're going to show how you can use Ansible for both Windows and Linux configuration management. We're going to show you how you can use it to do things like configure IIS or other application level stuff, or maybe configure domain controller. We're going to jump into Ansible Tower, which is kind of a central location to execute your Ansible code. And then we'll show you kind of beyond the traditional ways that you can use Ansible of maybe OS level config and configuration management. They're really expanding out into a vast ecosystem. And today we're going to demo how you can use it with NetApp storage. And you'll also see how you can work with provisioning and some networking. Alrighty, so in general, Ansible is an overall platform, right? So it came from the open source world before before Red Hat acquired it, and kind of the basis of Ansible is the Ansible engine. So that's the CLI utility that you can execute locally, and it's kind of just this universal language, and it's a base runtime engine that allows you to configure systems. And the platform extends from there to Ansible Tower, which is when you're starting to manage more systems with Ansible than just your local system can handle. Tower allows you to kind of scale out your operations, delegate processes to different teams, and kind of operate in a bigger manner. And then on top of that, with the Red Hat subscription, there's the opportunity for a lot more kind of value add. They have things like insights and some compliance modules that allow you to use kind of a software as a service. You get vendor supported modules, and you get some additional kind of security type stuff as well. So why Ansible? There's a few other people out there in the space you've probably heard of, Puppet or Chef, maybe even Salt. So why do we pick Ansible? And this slide really kind of sums it up. But really, just to kind of start over at the left, it's simple, right? It's just YAML. You can look at it. It's easy to read. Just about anybody without programming experience can pick up an Ansible playbook and really kind of understand what's going on. If you look at the output, same thing, right? There's tasks, and you can identify kind of the flow of what you're doing and what happens. So you don't need any kind of like comp sci degree or anything like that. Tasks are executed kind of in order, and just about everybody can use it. The ecosystem is really vast, and you can just get going really quickly and use it for whatever you're working with. Some of the other benefits that kind of set it apart, Things like Puppet and Chef are agent-based kind of architectures. And what's great about Ansible is that it's agentless. So I don't need to go and install stuff over on my systems in order to manage them. I can just point it at the system and say, go. So I don't need to worry about agents. I don't like agents. And you can just kind of get going, right? Like there's no deployment. Say you want to start managing your systems, you don't need to worry about deploying that agent out to everybody and kind of getting going. You can just hit the gas pedal. And then kind of just to sum it all up in the middle there, is kind of the vast ecosystem that I've been mentioning, right? You can use it for just about anything. It originally came from the configuration management space, doing things like managing SSH or web servers, but really it's expanded beyond that. You can manage whole workflows with it. You can do application deployment with it. I've done things like F5 network automation, or even into the Cisco space now. And overall, you can control your whole application lifecycle with just one tool. And so this is, I'll jump back for just 1 second. So one of the key things here that underlies the whole principle of Ansible is this idea of infrastructure as code. And infrastructure as code is this, at a high level, it's an idea where rather than doing things independently and separately, you have a single code repository that defines what your infrastructure looks like. And so Ansible allows you to do that. You can put it in source control, and this helps you track changes, things like change control. And through Ansible playbooks and stuff like that, you get this idea of code review and peer review, where you can just see what's changed in your code, and get peer review, make comments, suggestions, changes, and see what's going to happen to your infrastructure before you run it. That really helps it scale. So what can I do with Ansible? I touched on this a little bit. So you can do kind of overall orchestration. What does my workflow look like? What steps do I need to execute when? What defines a failure? All the way through configuration management, like I've discussed, and provisioning. So you can create new systems with it. You can delete old systems, cleanup. It's great for that. And beyond that, you can do full application delivery workflow with it. Go and deploy, or copy your files over here and turn on the web server, restart this service. Any kind of continuous delivery workflow can also be run through an Ansible playbook. And as far as what infrastructure it's supporting, just about everything. So I'll show today firewalls. It's got some great support for containers now. In Kubernetes, it's almost exactly like running just pure Kubernetes YAML, but you get the benefits that Ansible provides on top of that. It supports all of the major clouds out there, as well as VMware, which I'm considering these days to be kind of an on-prem cloud, all the way through servers, storage, and network devices. And one of the benefits of having kind of Red Hat as kind of the owner of Ansible, and they've got this vast partner network. So when you go and you're working with Ansible, all of these vendors have supported modules that they've developed, oftentimes in partnership with Red Hat. So you can get support on a lot of these modules if Red Hat is partnered with them. And there's vendor supported modules. And then that extends into the community as well. But there's quite a list of available platforms you can automate with Ansible. Okay, so we're going to jump into the demo a little bit. And so what I'm going to show in the demo is a bit of provisioning. So we're going to create some VMs in VMware, and I'll show that. They're going to be Windows virtual machines. We're going to configure those virtual machines and actually set up a domain. So I'm going to create a domain controller, and then join another system to that domain. And along the way, we're going to do some other things like add users. But in general, just about anything's possible, right? I often use it for system, MSI installation, things like that, turning on or off Windows features, and kind of the list you see here today. So let's jump into it after a quick set. All right. So This is Ansible Tower. The majority of my demo is going to be in Tower just because it makes it a little easier to visualize versus the command line. So I'll show you kind of the code that we're going to run. So if we pop in here into provision, I'll make it a little bigger. So what we're going to do is we're going to execute this role here and then provision our Active Directory controller. And you can see how simple it is, right? When I open up this playbook, I'm doing really a lot of things in this playbook with just a few lines, right? So when I go ahead and execute this, I'll show you what's going to happen. So let's pop in here. Windows demo. And we're going to launch. At runtime, so within Tower, I've put this playbook in, the one that we just looked at, provision.yml. I've put that up in source control. I've told Tower where my source control exists. And I've told it I want to execute this playbook with this name. And I can put in credentials. So it knows my VMware credentials. It knows Ansible Vault credentials. So I encrypt a lot of my secrets using that. And then you can tell it certain tags that you want to apply and things like that. And then down here at runtime, you can specify specific variables that you might want to set separately from what's in your source control. So I'm going to launch this job. It's going to go ahead and pull my newest code from source control and then execute. So that way we know we can actually tag it to certain revisions or things like that. You can have the concept of a production tag and a dev tag and run separate playbooks against different infrastructure if you choose. But in this case, I'm just grabbing from master. And there we go. Great. So we can see here there's a lot of stuff that's going to fly by, and I'll dig right into that. But initially, we're doing some some basic checks. Make sure our domain password is matching complexity requirements, things like that. We're going to launch instances in VMware. And so before those finish up, I want to show you right away in VMware. Got some pre-baked instances here that I'll be doing the rest of the demo on because this takes about 30 minutes to spin up. Oops. Cancel this one. Sorry about that. I ran against the pre-baked instances. So it's telling me everything's already created. So I'll actually take this moment to, so it's not making any changes right now. I've executed a playbook that's already been run. So it's just confirming that everything matches my desired state. But for the purposes of the demo, I want to spin up some new stuff. So I'll run the second one here. And within this demo, you can see I've changed the name prefix here to demo. And so what we'll see when I jump over to VMware after this executes, we'll see some new instances spun up. And I'll jump back into what happened with the rerun there in a later section of the demo. We're just a little patient here. Great, we're going to start executing. Awesome. And let's start provisioning some instances. So demo God's willing, I will jump over here and you can see already I'm provisioning several instances right off the bat, right? And so this is something that might have taken, 30 minutes maybe previously. I guess if you're fast, you can click through much quicker than that. But I've put exactly what I want into my code and Ansible can fire it off right away. And so I'm creating these instances. So let's jump into a little bit more detail about what's actually happening within this role. So what I'm doing here with this role, it's called manage instances. So I can jump into that code here. Manage VMware instances. And I have playbooks, so it's going to execute this playbook here, right? When I want to build, it's going to run build. When I want to tear down, it's going to run tear down. So we'll jump into build because that's what we care about right now. And you can see we've built a lot of kind of logic into what's going on here, and we only need to do that once. So oftentimes, right, there's a lot of tribal knowledge. What do I deploy where? What dev is this data store and prod is that data store. You can put a lot of that logic into your variables here and really simplify what's on the surface, right? If we jump back to our main variables here. So this is our playbook, and we've got some variables, but it's real simple at the top level, right? Almost anyone can read this and understand what's going on. And behind the scenes, we're doing quite a bit of work here. So we're going to provision, and then once that's complete, we will see a domain controller online. So if I jump over here, we're going to wait for these to complete, but I'll jump over to my pre-cooked items. If we take a look at this webinar system down here, this DC, I'm going to go ahead and pop that open. All right, great. So this is a system that was provisioned from the same playbook. I just had a different set of variables for the names. And if we look, it's actually all configured as a domain controller. If I look at the computer settings, the best way I can show this is right here. We're on a domain. We've called it red8.cloud. But along the way, we've done a lot of config. I mean, setting up a domain controller is not really a trivial task. And you know, frankly, not one that I'm originally super familiar with. But we had a set of code that we could use. And I just had to put in some variables and target the right systems. And Ansible really does the heavy lifting for me. So we can jump into some of that config about what's happening with the domain controller here. So show you the output of the last job, and then I'll show you kind of the code that made this happen. So if we go to the demo setup, and this is one of the great things about it, right? So with Tower, all of these actions are logged. I have kind of a clear audit trail about who ran what when. You can see I ran this job and it was launched by who at what time, and I can see exactly what changed. At the end here, you know, I made 14 changes, and several other things didn't even have to change. So when we go through the AD you know, controller setup, you can see right here that we're doing things like starting AD services. We're configuring the AD domain controller and installing AD services through Windows features, right? And that all takes a real simple syntax. And I'll show you that right now. If we jump over to Windows AD controller. So yeah, right here for managing Windows, and for the purposes of time, we won't jump into Linux, but the Linux modules are very similar. They have a really simple syntax, and what you end up with is the name of the module, the state that you want it to be in, and then a set of arguments for that module. So in this case, right, you know, it's easy for me to see. I'm making a change to the firewall. I'm disabling all of these profiles. I'm making a change to Windows features, and I would like AD domain services to be present. And right off the bat, right, I can just pick this up and run this and understand how my domain controller was configured. If I wanted to make changes to a piece of, you know, let's say we're decommissioning a domain controller, all I'd have to do is change this to absent, rerun, and it will uninstall for me. So this is one of the benefits of Ansible. It's really kind of a key component, is that whatever's in this file, in this case present, I can run this as many times as I want, and I have confidence that it's not going to make changes unless I need it to. So if I run this, you know, install domain feature, right, it won't change if it doesn't need to. It checks what the status is, it determines if it needs to take action, and it will if it needs to, but otherwise it won't make any change. And that's really cool because, you know, you don't have to rely on putting that type of logic in your script. That's probably 10, 15 lines of PowerShell just to go and say, do we have this feature? Okay, we do. Let's skip this step. But in the case of Ansible, we just have to say, I would like it to be present, and it handles the rest. What else happens in here? Another great thing that, that spans both platforms is user management. So typically you end up with kind of a set of roles, and think of a role as just that, right? This server might have a web server role, or that server might be a DB server role. And associated with those roles would be a list of configuration items. Let's say users. So in this case, we're adding a Windows group, and we can add users to that group. So we can use that kind of functionality to make sure that, let's say, the developer teams have access to log into their development systems, but not their production systems. And you can do that in both platforms, and I'll show you. We scroll down here. We're creating some DNS records. It's also a handy thing that people often overlook. No more going into SolarWinds and and those types of tools. So right here, right, if we want to add a user, we can just pop that in here. So we can create a set of files that configures our service accounts, things like that, adds them to the proper groups, or sets group membership on a system properly, to make sure people have things like remote desktop access or maybe SSH access. And kind of the same thing here. If you try to add a user 2 times in PowerShell, you'll get an error back, right? In this case, we just say, I would like that user to be there. Ansible handles the rest. Cool. So I believe that's about all I had for the Windows portion. Just to kind of wrap up a little bit. This job should be finishing here, the new provision, in probably about the next 5 minutes. But a thing I want to emphasize, right? I run through this really quick, but what I've done is set up an entirely new domain over the course of probably about 15 minutes. If we look at the last job execution time, I've gone from 0, provisioned systems, installed all of the roles required to run a domain, DNS, file services, domain controller, and then even joined a system to that domain. I can show you the client system here, but all in let's see, we finished at 9:24 and we started, this is an older one. It takes about 15 to 20 minutes roughly. We'll see this one here. And just to wrap up, if we look at the workstation here, we hop into it. So we provision this workstation here as well. Activated, it's handy, it's on the domain. So you don't have to worry about any of that. That happens all at the same time. No more complicated steps, no more complicated PowerShell, and Ansible handles the whole workflow for you. Cool. So I'm going to go ahead and jump back to the slides for just a minute here.
Just a reminder, don't forget to insert any questions that you have into the chat feature within WebEx.
Cool. So again, we showed Windows in the demo for the purposes of time, but you can do the same type of things on Linux. So I don't want to leave that out, but Windows typically is a little easier to show in the GUI. So let's take this to the next step, right? Like, this is all great. Like, I can use Ansible for OS configuration, but maybe my job isn't necessarily a sysadmin. Maybe I'm a storage administrator, or maybe I'm a network administrator. How does this all apply to me? And how can Ansible help me? So we'll take a look at NetApp. NetApp has some really killer support in Ansible. And yeah, we can leverage those modules to do just about anything within, kind of the NetApp world. So we can create SVMs, which is like the central storage virtual machine. We can create policies, or we can even, create volumes or NFS mounts, things of that nature. So we'll jump over into the code, and I'll show you what we got going on. So let's say, we've got a request and we'd like to provision a new SVM for whatever reason. So we can do that. So we make this code right here. We put credentials in about how we're connecting to the NetApp instance. I've encrypted using this is Ansible Vault. stores an encrypted version of your secrets using AES 256 encryption. So I give it an encryption passphrase. It obscures my my secrets, and then they're safe to store. So in this case, we're going to create a few things. We're going to create a NetApp policy. We're going to create a volume. And then we'll also create an SVM in the NetApp. And we'll do that directly from code. So you'll see here how if I use Git, right, I can add my NetApp change. I can commit and say adding a new SVM. And this is where things start to get really cool with Tower. So I could push this up as a pull request and get some peer review. But for the purposes of the demo, I'm going to push it straight up. And this is actually going to fire a webhook from GitHub directly to Tower. So if I jump into Tower, you'll see that we've started creating the NetApp job just fired right here. Cancel this other guy. It's holding the lock right now. Okay, so it's going to update my source, and then it's going to go ahead and do some stuff on the NetApp. We'll see that here. Just so you know, there's nothing up my sleeve. This is the NetApp control kind of management plane. You can see I've got 4 SVMs here. We'll start to see resources come up right after this job finishes. Great. You can see right here it's asking for vault password. And I've set up this job with my vault credential so that it will decrypt my secrets. But you can see right here I'm creating the SVM, I'm creating an export policy, associated rules, a volume. And often people like to use this for like snapshot orchestration across different volumes and things like that. So that type of capability is also available through a lot of storage providers. We jump back into ONTAP, hit refresh. Bam, we've got an SVM. That's killer. And what's cool, right, is so I have this now, and I can manage if anything has changed. So I want to know what's changed with this code. So if I look at GitHub, this is where I'm storing my code, right? And I look right here at this NetApp file. I have a history of what's happened in this file. I can look at my history, and I can see who changed what when. And I can manage that drift by re-executing or running a plan within Tower. So if I run it again, this all returns back, with the exception of the snapshot. It's just going to confirm that all of my configuration is exactly how it is in my code. So my code is reflected in my live infrastructure, and we'll know if anything's changed from the result of this run here. You can see it's not going to go and do anything damaging to the NetApp. Right here, you know, no changes to make. If I liked, I could have gone in here and made this a check run, so it's even safer. It'll just tell me if there's changes. But in this case, I ran a full run, but it tells me nothing's changing. Everything's exactly like you want it. You don't have to worry about that, and it creates a snapshot at the end. So that's great. What if we want to make a change? Let's say we want to add a new volume. So this is where the power of infrastructure as code really comes together. So we want a new volume. So let's take this block, put it right here, and I'll call this live demo block. Matt, so I know I'm actually waiting for questions at the end, but I'll actually answer that right now. So I didn't tell it there were no changes. So what I told it was, yeah, sorry guys. So there's a question in the chat, and the question is, where did I tell it there were no changes? So I'm not telling Ansible that. Ansible is telling me that. It's actually a great question. So what I've defined here, right, is I would like a volume, and I would like it to be named volume name. My volume name is right here, webinar demo. And so when I run this 2 times, both times, all I'm telling Ansible is I would like a volume named volume name. The first time, that volume doesn't exist, so it makes the change. The second time, it goes and it asks NetApp. Ansible is doing this in the background. It says, do I have a volume that matches this name? NetApp says yes. So Ansible tells me no changes. So I'll look at that in the GUI here real quick. So right here when it says OK, that means there's no changes to make. And I get a summary down here in the play recap of what has changed. So the only thing that's changed in this play run, since I haven't changed my playbook, is a snapshot. So I've created a new snapshot at the end of this playbook. That's the only action that was taken on my infrastructure. And we'll see that illuminated just a little more here. So if we do change this file, right? So I've just added this new block of code. You can see all this green stuff is a new block of code. And I'm going to call it a live demo, right? So I'm going to create this new volume in real time right here. Okay, and we're gonna git status, git add NetApp, git commit, do it live. We're gonna push that up, and the same playbook is gonna be run here. Bam. I do need code review. I don't know if you can tell, I'm actually not a NetApp expert, but that's kind of, one of the selling points of Ansible. I don't have to be a NetApp expert, and I'm able to use, kind of some of this code. I actually made that change, John. Oh, look at that. I named it improperly. I do need code review. Live demo, NetApp demo. Just when I thought I could get through one demo without an error. Git commit without name, or with proper names. Git, oops. Git commit, proper names, git push. All right, so this one should hopefully work. And so to this point of code review, there's actually different workflows you can use in a real environment to run the plans and the checks ahead of time. Just since I'm one person, I don't really have that running right now. Okay, no changes to most of my infrastructure. We already have one volume. Second volume was just created, right? So we can see in this playbook, this is where Ansible tells me only one thing has changed at this commit number. So we can trace that back to our source control. We see that there was a change. We can follow it all the way back to the code. We can see where it failed. And we could even see this commit SHA right here would match up with the proper names. You can see what changed. Cool. So one more thing I want to touch on while we're in this section here is so when you put your playbooks out, right, one of the benefits of Tower is that you can delegate control to your playbooks to other members of the team. Whether that be end users or customers or other members in your team that might not have the same access as you. Let's say I'm a storage admin and I want sysadmins to be able to create volumes without my involvement, but only in a specific way that I've codified, right? But I do want to let them do that on their own. So we can pop down here to, so we have a playbook that says go create a volume. It takes in a parameter, and I'll show you that playbook right here. It takes in one parameter, and that's the volume name. And there's really only one task here. So this is great for things like snapshots or single one-offs like this, like creating a volume. I can create what's called a survey. The survey will create a form in NetApp And I get all these options about, different, I can limit the types of response through things like drop-down menus. I can allow people to put in passwords, or give people like a multiple choice options. So in this case, I've exposed a survey to create a NetApp volume, and we'll run that. So you can see I'm prompted right here. What's the name of my volume, bruh? I'll say demo volume 2. Let me go next. And if I actually look back at this job template while that's running, you can see I have a history for this job. If I look right here in completed jobs. So I know who's created these volumes when. So you can just jump back into the history and see what happened when. But in this case, right, it took our demo volume 2. And God willing, I didn't make another NetApp error. Hey, we created a volume. So I can jump back into on command. And we've actually done a lot of changes to the NetApp through source control right now, right? And through Ansible Tower. We can see if we look at our webinar demo SVM, we can see all the different, kind of pieces of infrastructure that we've created just right here in this demo. We could use those same, I actually have a teardown playbook. I don't have time to run it right now. But we can run the same steps, right? You take almost the exact same playbook and you put just, I want them to go away. And I can tear down all this infrastructure. And this is how I keep the real NetApp guys from getting angry at me. I delete my stuff. So that's kind of the NetApp section. I've also got a same version of that survey where I can go and delete volumes specifically, should I choose. But we're going to kind of transition from here away from storage towards networking. So for the purposes of the demo, we've spun up a Palo Alto. So we've got this Palo Alto sitting here, and this is our firewall. But there's also modules out there for a lot of Cisco appliances. I think even Fortinet appliances. Networking's a really big push within Ansible right now, and there's a lot of great support for it. So you can do a lot of your networking configs through Ansible. So I've got this firewall that's out there in the ether. It's pretty basic. I don't have many objects in here. If I look at my security policies, I've got some basic security policies. So let's say I want to create some objects within the Palo Alto. This is my address group, and this is my other address group. And then maybe let's also add some firewall rules. I want to block this and that, right? So I jump into my PanOS config here. We can see that we're going to create some address objects. We're going to give them values, right? So this is Cloudflare's DNS. We call it Cloudflare. Well, I'm not committing that. Anyway, so we're going to create these two objects. We'll also see some security rules going in place here that'll block or allow traffic between different services. So how do we run that? Just the same as anything else. I don't need to know how to go into Palo Alto and find all that stuff. I don't need to know much about how to deal with that stuff. And I get the added benefit of infrastructure as code and stability. I can run these same playbooks and have a live representation of what my Palo Alto config looks like. So let's jump in. So PanOS config. Very similar to all of the other playbooks here. The only differences might be how I'm triggering it from a webhook, or what credentials I'm using. I've changed my playbook to the PanOS playbook, and let's fire. Water break. I should use this time. All right. Great. So I made some changes to the Palo Alto. And you can see here, I've created these two address groups, just like we put in. Or sorry, these are the firewall rules. I'm looking at the Ansible test firewall rules, allowing traffic from any zone to this address. And if we jump into our address groups, we've got two address groups here, just like we created test 1 and test 2. And the principles are just the same as we saw with the NetApp. If I were to make changes in my code or run the playbook again, it's only going to make changes to the infrastructure where appropriate. So I could run this again safely and manage things like config drift or check for differences. So that's great. And so really, to kind of wrap up before questions here, kind of what we've seen, right, is across a broad spectrum of different systems. So whether that be InfoSec, security, networking, or we could look at storage, or we could look at OS level, or system provisioning. We looked at VMware, but you can do this with any cloud, so cloud engineering as well. You're using the same universal language to configure all of them. So what's great about that, right, is you have kind of a central language, the same way to talk to each other. So you can really, kind of, I hate to say stop working in silos. Everybody says that. But everybody can work together a lot better because you can read the same set of code and everybody understands kind of the same structure. So this is kind of what we saw here with the Git deployment workflow. I pushed my changes up to a central version control. It triggered my changes through Ansible Tower out. And I think that's about it. These are kind of some of the things that we can change within networking, like we discussed. And I think we're ready to break for questions. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Okay, so the first question comes from Joel Armani from Parsons. And he says, has your team had success using the Windows SSH subsystem for remote execution of the playbook contests?
So this is a good question, Joel. Ansible for Windows has been out for quite some time now. I don't know exactly how long. And I think SSH just came out like GA in Windows Server 2019. Short answer is no. There was extensive efforts, within the Ansible community to support WinRM. So the primary method of communication is WinRM. But I think it is kind of being discussed and experimental right now to use SSH as the transport method. So short answer is no. WinRM is kind of the standard right now. But I believe kind of upstream contributors are looking towards SSH and other execution methods. And just to jump on that a little bit more, there's different communication methods to things like Cisco devices or things like NetApp. I'm not actually SSHing into the NetApp. So Ansible has different concepts of how it's communicating with these other devices. And you can kind of connect through different methods. It's not just SSH and WinRM. Oftentimes it's REST calls.
Okay. Second question from Peter Gallerani from Parsons. What is the minimum features a Windows host has to have installed for Ansible to interact with that host?
You just need WinRM configured. So as long as you have WinRM configured and the proper ports open, then you're good to go. You're going to have like, depending on your environment, you might require certain certificate authentication or things like that. And that's all supported through Ansible. You can provide those methods because at the base level, it's just WinRM that's running. So that's all you need.
There have been a couple questions about recording the webinar as well as playbooks afterwards. And just so everybody knows, we have been recording this and we will be providing a link to all of the participants following the webinar. So just FYI. And then the next question about Ansible, Raghu from Vertex asked, does Ansible Tower store state of environment?
Yeah, so this is a good question. So Ansible has kind of a different concept of state. Typically, this question comes from people with exposure to Terraform. And the concept of state in Terraform, or in Ansible, I'm sorry, is really back to the basics of infrastructure as code. If I want to know the state of my environment, I just look at my code. So if I'm taking this example of the Palo Alto, right? There's nothing else in my environment except for what is here. So if I want to make changes, right, that's the line where I showed you I'd put state absent. By default, it's going to say it wants the state to be present. But as far as like state goes, what is in your playbooks reflects the state of your environment. And if you want that to change, you go ahead and update your playbooks, and your environment state will change.
Okay, that completes the questions. Any other questions quickly put through chat we can try and fit in? If not, I think we're ready. If you want to go to the last slide.
Sure. Last call for questions.
Last call. Stephen's sitting right here. Okay.
Alrighty, great. Thanks, everyone.